But my beats, they are hard.
Hello and welcome to the BCSN SportsWrap. Brian Fulford and AD Drew here for what we're calling part number 3 of our end of the season podcast. We have given you, I would say, by the time this is all said and done, we would have given you probably about 6 hours worth of commentary and review on the end of the season. AD, how are your jaws feeling? Are your muscles a little tight from all of this talking and thinking that you've been doing?
Brian, I've got the hot tea and lemon going right now to keep my throat massaged so I don't get hoarse as we have continued to bring in-depth coverage of HBCU sports, in particular HBCU football.
Yeah, no, this has been, we have put, I think part 1, we broke up into 3 different parts. Part 2, we broke up into 2. I think this one, we might be able to get all within one segment, but who knows? Maybe we'll break this one up into 2 segments as well. So that way we'll kind of keep with the trend. But again, yeah, definitely about 6 hours worth of commentary on this show. And in this show, well, before we get to the beginning of the show, let's set it up like we always do. If you're not familiar with our show, you can find us, the Black College Sports Network. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at MyBCSN1, the number 1. You can find us on Facebook. You can find the Black College Sports Network. You can also find the BCSN SportsWrap on Facebook as well. A lot of times we'll post our shows and our stories on Facebook as well as our website, which is mybcsn.net. That's www.mybcsn.net. If you go over to broadcast, you will see the SportsWrap, or you can go over to the news section and read some of the stories and things like that we put up. So in this part 3, we're going to first start out by talking about the teams and the seasons of the decade. And we're talking from 2010 to 2019. Some of the different Division I FCS as well as the Division II / NAIA, what we call the under D1. And we're going to do that with Dr. Kenyatta Cavill. Kenyatta Cavill of the Inside the HBCU Sports Lab, a friend of the podcast, and we'll be doing that with him. And then we will also talk about some of the individual performers and plays of the year. And we're talking about single plays that stood out to us, and we'll also talk about the individuals who had great games in the past year. So I think I got that covered. I got that covered, didn't I, Eddie?
I think you hit it on the head. It's so much that went on this decade. We had to call in reinforcements to help us out and help us guide us through that portion. And I'm hoping Dr. Cavill can bring some insight and a different opinion in on just what you and I come up with on a consistent basis.
All right. Yep. So I think you'll enjoy this upcoming segment here with Dr. Cavill. And of course, this show will be great if you guys who are listening share your thoughts with us on Twitter, share your thoughts with us on Facebook, or even on the website pages and let us know what you think about the team of the decade, the teams, the program of the decade, and then some of the other superlative thoughts and comments from the past season. So with that said, here is our interview with Dr. Kenyatta Cavill, and we get ready to break down the decade of Black college football and then more later in the show. Hello and welcome to the BCSN Sports Wrap. Brian Fulford and A.D. Drew here, and joining us for this segment as we kind of look back on the past decade that was from 2010 to 29. Joining us, Dr. Kenyatta Cavill, of course, inside the HBCU Sports Lab is the show. Doc, how are we doing today? Glad to have you on with us.
I'm doing well. It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So with the end of the season, let's just kind of start there. Have you had a chance to sort of breathe? I know you went to the Celebration Bowl, and then we had all the excitement with the polls and all that stuff. Have you had a chance to breathe? All this while Christmas and all the holidays are going on. Have you had a chance to breathe yet?
No, I actually haven't. I'll probably get my first chance to really breathe literally the last day of the year tomorrow. We just did our final show, I guess as you would say, final show of the decade. Today we moved this generally on Tuesday. We moved it to Monday to get people out so they could enjoy New Year's Eve. And last week we did it on Monday as well so they could enjoy Christmas Eve with the family. So trying to be a family-operated show. So get a chance to breathe tomorrow. Thanks for asking that. It's been fast and furious. Wow.
Yeah. What's sort of been your big takeaway? Maybe a thought or two as you sort of over the past week or so, as you've seen how things have developed, listened to a lot of the reaction and seen a lot of it. What's some of your general thoughts before we get into talking about the decade?
That HBCU sports, specifically football, is all well and good when you have so much passion out there with so many people having opinions and interest in other people's opinion on the various platforms, on the radio going out there. So I think Black college sports, HBCUs, athletics are very healthy right now.
And you've been putting out your polls since about at least 2002 for the last couple of decades here. Can you recall any kind of period in time? Let's just stick to this decade. Is there another year that kind of comes to mind when you think about how this year ended, all of the just stuff that went on with it? I thought this was a unique year because of the fact that you had a Division II team with the most wins of all Black college teams. You had a team that finished with the best record in its conference, not necessarily play in the Celebration Bowl, which is the quote-unquote national championship game, as it's been described by many, and that's a whole other thing. But I thought this was kind of an interesting year for that. Is there anything that comes to mind over the past decade that is maybe similar?
No, not really over the last decade. Oddly enough, as you probably said, I've been doing a two-tier HBCU football poll since 2002. And one of the reasons I came up with the two-tier football poll was back in 2001, early 2000, when there were a lot of arguments and sentiments about who should be the Black college national champion almost literally 2 decades ago, was the fact that you had Tuskegee at the time really doing well at the Division II level, and you had Southern Jackson State, a couple of teams out of the MEAC in terms of FAMU, and there were some arguments in terms of the schedule. Tuskegee was undefeated, 1 loss, and who should be the Black college national champion. And because of that is really the reason why I decided to create a two-tier poll, which I break down in terms of major division and a mid-major division, if you would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in that 2001 year, according to now, I always tell kids don't trust Wikipedia, so I'm going to use this as in full honesty and transparency as the reference that I'm looking at here. So from 2001, it lists Florida A&M at 7-4 under Coach Billy Joe, Grambling State at 11-0 under Coach Doug Williams, and then there's a little note here: record includes forfeited games, was 10-1, and then Tuskegee at 11-1 under Coach Rick Comegee. So that was the year before. That was the year before you started in 2002.
That's correct, and that was really the impetus for me to get started when you're breaking down these polls. So that's the last time I can remember. So, no, not really like this decade. It's been a while since you had so much fanfare and questions or people wanting to get in to who should be the number one team. And oddly enough, it's between two FCS programs that are getting a lot of this attention, and not much is mentioned about Bowie State, who actually went through the year undefeated until they got in the tournament and lost that first-round game, which was different from what was going on then than it is now.
Dr. Gaville, just curious, how far do you think Bowie would have had to go in order for them to seriously be considered number one in all polls?
Oh, that's a great question. If recent history is any indicator, I would say at least to the semifinals, but I would hesitate that they probably would have literally had to win it all to really get a serious glimpse in terms of being recognized by the unitary polls that actually puts both the Division II NAIA programs, which really get left out, such as Langston, with the FCS programs and those polls that put it all together. For them, Bowie State Bulldogs, to get any serious run in those polls, I think they would have had to win the national championship.
And I think we had a consensus that we thought they would have at least had to make it to a regional finals with us here at the SportsWrap program.
Yeah, I would like to say that, but I remember the years of Winston-Salem State, and while they got of it, they had to get to the semifinals to really get that recognition, and a lot of other teams were down. But the reason why I say they almost have to get to semifinals and really get to the finals and win it is because now you have so much impetus at the major division between the MEAC and SWAC with the Celebration Bowl that I think it has weighted even more so for the FCS programs than ever before. So that game being on major broadcast television, all the media exposure that it gets has really leapfrogged the SWAC and the MEAC, certainly the FCS programs, to that level. I even think Hampton and Tennessee State, for that matter, would not only have to have regular season games where they basically beat up on the FCS competition, but they'd have to go really far in the FCS tournament. And I'm talking about semifinals and finals, maybe not win it like Division II programs, but I think they would have to go really far to get a nod for the Black College Championship. I just think the media has bought in, generally speaking, just in terms of the coverage and how much attention the MEAC and SWAC is getting from their weekly games, that it is really dominating the HBCU football landscape. And I think one of the things of the decades, as we look at the decades of how things have changed, which is the impetus in a lot of ways to your question, I think one of the biggest changes out there is the Celebration Bowl and the partnership between the MEAC and SWAC, essentially with ESPN for these games of the week, with the MEAC having every game covered on social media with so much trending between social media and African Americans, blacks, whichever term you prefer to use, with the impetus of how much we use social media platform. I mean, with 70% of the trends, it just captures that market more than what we probably realize in regards to how we literally cover or get our news today, which is streaming platforms. And that's why you got people like ESPN jumping on it. It's not by accident. They know there's money to be made.
Right. So let's move forward into let's talk about some of the seasons, the top seasons, individual teams, individual years. We broke up not only under D1 or mid-major, as your poll calls them, and Division I major programs. So let's start with the under D1. Some of the candidates that we came up with, that AD and I, when we were talking for top seasons, we have Winston-Salem State's 2012 team, which 14-1. That team went to the national championship game. You had Tuskegee's 2015 team, Albany State's 2010 team, Bowie State 2018, and Virginia State 2017. Is there a team that stands out if you were to say, hey, this was probably the best team, best season out of that group, or if there's another candidate that you want to throw into that mix?
Obviously that Winston-Salem State team of 2012 is a no-brainer, making it to the championship game. I think there's 2 years with two of the teams that you have on there that kind of let you know how they did this decade. Is actually that 2011 team that went to the semifinals.
Right.
For Winston-Salem State was a very strong team, and they should certainly be in the top 5. I guess if I have to knock out somebody, sometimes being the furthest away would be Albany State. It's 2010, so it starts the decade, so certainly has a chance to be in there. The other one that I think is just recently, which is all our minds, the fact that they went undefeated in the regular season. Is that Bowie State this year? This 2019 team should get a little bit of love. It's harder to knock somebody out of that team. I really like that Virginia State 17 team, so I might, while I bring them up, I might probably drop out the 2018 Bowie State and put in place, if I had to take somebody back out, put in the 2019 team for Bowie State. I know the 2018 people love it with the quarterback getting so much love, but I'm just saying going
Amir Hall.
Regular season is a beauty. Ben Hall, thank you. Amir Hall, excuse me.
Yes, Amir.
It's a beautiful thing in terms of undefeated regular season.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a big discussion between AD and I tried to tell him that the 19 team might have been a little bit better than the 18 team, but
especially on the defensive side.
Thank you.
Yeah. This 2019 defensive side, woo, yeah. Boy, they were top 5 in a lot of categories.
They were number 7 overall in points allowed, and I think we ultimately went with the 2018 team based on their playoff run, because they did get into the playoffs and go a little bit deeper than this year's team.
Yeah, they got the victory. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's why we ultimately went for the 18 team instead of the 19 team.
That's a great argument.
The 11 and 12 Winston-Salem State teams. Now, those teams were, as I look at sort of the consensus polls, then they were pretty much the 11 seems to be sort of a consensus champion, meaning that most of the polls, I mean, obviously, most of the polls picked them as the champion. Most of them did. I mean, those who didn't have, I know you had you actually had Alabama State in that year in 2011, because obviously you did the 2 polls, so you had Alabama State as the major division winner, and then Norfolk State appeared on a couple of people's polls, those who did the split poll as well. Right. But we had an interesting look back at 2012. 2012 was kind of interesting because not only did you have that Winston-Salem State team, but you had 3. You've seen fan bases fuss about 2 FCS teams this year, but imagine that year where you had 3 FCS teams. You had UAPB at 10-2, Bethune-Cookman at 9-3, and Tennessee State at 8-3. Your poll had Tennessee State. You were the only poll that picked Tennessee State that year. What do you remember about that year, 2012, and how that poll went down, or just the teams in that year?
I just remember how Tennessee State had a dominant team in so many different ways. If I recall correctly, they basically went undefeated against the HBC program. And at that time, Jackson State was a pretty decent football program, not so much over the last couple of years. But they really played some good football, and they were putting up some points, very solid on defense, and they dominated the OVC. It's one of the first times in a long time that the Tennessee State really did not just did well in OVC, really dominated that competition, and that's what I remember standing out about that Tennessee State program.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we noted is they beat head-to-head. I think they beat UAPB, beat Bethune, beat FAMU, and Jackson State. So that was their 4-0 unbeaten record in that season. Jumping over to the majors. Yeah, jumping over to the majors seasons. Obviously, A&T ended up 1. I think we had Grambling 16. Bethune had quite a few seasons in the early part of the decade that were pretty impressive. We picked the 2010 team, and then of course Alcorns had a good run of late. We picked their 2014 team. Any thoughts or anything that you would kind of counter from the Division I teams?
Not really. I think that one was pretty golden in a lot of ways as you talk about that Bethune-Cookman team in 2010 getting some wins over the FBS program, the A&T undefeated season, which included a win over the FBS program, and just the way they dominated the MEAC in so many ways and found a way to really beat a strong Grambling team that was playing well that you saw just the year before. 16 went all the way and won it, and according to my major division, won the championship. So you have an A&T defeating the previous national champion that really tattooed that season at 12-0. So I like in a lot of ways the way you get it done. I think you might have to throw some love in there for Texas Southern University Tigers to start the decade. That team really dominated. Obviously, that championship was won on field, but taken away NCAA on paper, so that I can see why you don't put them in there. But just kind of wanted to tease a little bit, give Texas Southern a little bit of love. Right. But I think you really got it right with the teams of the decade for D1. Not much argument there for me.
And I got to admit, we found it kind of interesting that the 2010 Bethune team, which was unbeaten heading into the Florida Classic, actually lost. The last time FAMU beat Bethune was that year.
Yeah, great point.
And still won the conference. It then went to the playoffs and still was declared Black College National Champions. Found that kind of interesting, kind of a little humorous based on comments that we got over the course of the past week.
Wise one. Great point that you put out there, which again gives you just how much noise is around the Celebration Bowl now. To your point. Without it, you get less argument in regards to that. And people are putting so much stock in the Celebration Bowl, which is not necessarily a bad thing because you're getting more exposure, and it's just going to make the competition to get there even more important. But your point is well taken in terms of look what happens at the beginning of the decade and look at what happens at the end of the decade and how things can change.
As we get ready to wrap up here, let's talk overall team of the decade. Let's start in the major because I heard you bring this up on your show today. But I want to go to team of the decade between you had North Carolina A&T with 79 wins in the decade and 36 losses. You had Bethune-Cookman with 78 wins and 35 losses. Where do you stand on team of the decade in the major or D1 level?
At the D1 level, major division level, I'm happy to go with North Carolina A&T. And unfortunately for Bethune-Cookman, they don't have the benefits of having the Celebration Bowl. I just think the Celebration Bowl gives A&T the edge because you get to culminate the end of the year against another conference champion.
And
which is saying something. Unless, like you said, Bethune-Cookman went deep into the playoffs.
And they did. Then, they lost all those years.
Lost all those years, even with some of the FCS wins in there, which were very impressive. But I just think the Celebration Bowl rightfully gives the edge to North Carolina A&T because you get to play in that bowl game, and you get to do it against another conference champion, which to me has some value, which is why I would actually flip Grambling as 3 versus Alcorn as 4, because Grambling does have that one championship over North Carolina Central, versus Alcorn, although they've gotten there more times, they have not been able to get the victory.
You don't think there's any recency bias in there, Dr. Cavill, because the Celebration Bowl is new and a fresh idea versus
I think there's some bias.
Model.
Oh, I definitely think there's bias in there. I mean, all things we do have the bias, but I put it out front in terms of my bias is that I'm leaning towards the Celebration Bowl. It's fresher in your mind, but I think I can make a legitimate argument with saying that A&T gets the bump because they got victories over another conference champion. Bethune-Cookman, unfortunately, just didn't have that opportunity. The strength of those teams, I would argue that they probably would have defeated the SWAC champion at the time. But unfortunately, sometimes you just, you're just a victim of history.
Moving over to the under D1 or the mid-major level, the D2 NAIA, two interesting things. I think the fact that Albany State is the only team in the decade to have a winning season every year. All 10 years they had a winning season. And a team like Virginia State actually had one more loss than Winston-Salem State, who I think many will think of as the team of the decade. They had 31 losses during the decade and 73 wins, which actually was the third best among the teams in the decade. What are your thoughts on that level? Who did you rank, or who do you think, or you and the guy from the show call as the team of the decade in the mid-major under D1 level?
We broke it up between conferences, and essentially we gave the team of the decade conference-wise to SIAC, to Miles College. Charles Bishop gave it to Tuskegee. Albany State, rightfully as you did, needs to jump in there. A lot of their success was at the beginning of the decade. Obviously, they've been in the championship the last couple of years, but Miles has gotten that number. That's why they got a lot of the bid there. I think Virginia State, you can make an argument maybe they should be a little higher in some ways. As I did the major, I have them winning 2 of the national championships of the decade, obviously closing out with Bowie State. With the last 2 is the argument maybe they should get in there. I don't have Miles winning a national championship, although they've done really well in the conference. They played a very tough non-conference schedule, and other than the last 2 years, really this year, in my opinion, they were able to come on strong and win the conference, and you give them credit for that. But that's probably a team I would bump out. I would jump Virginia State to 4, and I would probably put in, as I said, I'd probably put in Bowie State at number 5.
Over Miles.
In regards to over Miles in a lot of ways in terms of what they did, closing out the decade so strong, being right there with Virginia State finally getting over the hump. So they played some really good football. Another team that I think should get some love that we don't do this much with, that should be in there, that has really played some good football. They tied for the national championship in my mid-major poll. The only time I've ever had a tie on either the major or mid-major division is Langston Lions in 2017. They tied with Virginia State Trojans as co-national champions with point-wise in that. And this is another program, because of the NAIA, that doesn't get a lot of love but has really played some good football. They have a couple of wins over SWAC schools at the FCS level in terms of what they've done. They have a couple of wins over Division II programs out of the SIAC and have really dominated transitioning from the Central State Football League to the Sooner Athletic League over the last couple of years. So that's one team. I might not be able to slide them in the top 5, but I think it's certainly a team that should get some love and maybe gets in at number 6. But my friends over there at Miles College are probably going to jump on me, but I would slide them out just because they were not able to do it over a season in such a way that they would get the Black College National Championship. I don't have them listed, and maybe you all do have them at the under D1, as you call it, winning the national championship, and why you have them in with their overall record. But that would be my argument in terms of some nuance, in terms of some teams that should get some love with Langston and Bowie State.
All right, appreciate you. I know we're short on time with you. You got to run. Let the people know, where can we find you? Let them know where they can find you again on Twitter, and where can we find the show again if they're not following you on Facebook. Go ahead and plug that if you would, Doc. Thank you for that. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that's Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, DrKenyattaCavil. Again, that's DrKenyattaCavil. You can catch me every Tuesday on Facebook Live or streaming. You can also catch us in terms of streaming it live, as I said, on Facebook. At Dr. Kenyatta Cavil or inside the HBCU Sports Lab every Tuesday from 6 to 7 Central Standard Time as we give you HBCU sports news, updates, and more of all programs, as you recall it, D1 and under D1 and mid-major and major divisions in terms of all sports. We cover it all year long. Obviously, during the fall, we look at football. During the winter, we look at men's and women's basketball. And during the spring, we get into some baseball talk and sneak in a little bit of track and field. And during the summer, you'll give us notification because we bring in researchers and interviews, in-depth interviews on folks, coaches at the HBCU sports level or that are doing research on HBCU athletic programs. Right, and yeah, definitely. I was, as I said, before we recorded this, I was listening to the show today. Always a good show. We appreciate you and all you've done to help us this year in 2019, and we look forward to growing with you in 2020. Have a happy New Year, Dr. Cavil. Thank you for your time this evening.
Appreciate you.
Certainly, you have a happy New Year's to both of you all, AD. In terms of what you bring in great content. It is my pleasure to partner with you all and look for me to do more partnerships with both you, AD and Brian. Great stuff that you're doing, outstanding work you're doing, and we need it out there more than ever. Continue with the great work. I love looking at all the information, and I'll do whatever I can to support.
We appreciate it. It means a lot, Doc. All right, take care. We'll be back after this with more breakdown of the top teams and seasons of the decade, and AD and I will also get into some of the individual plays and performers from the past year as well. We'll be back with the Sports Wrap right after these words.
Majesty is a premium health and wellness tea line focused on bringing delicious yet healthy tea blends to the community. Filled with an abundance of vitamins and antioxidants, we work to blend teas with exotic spices and fruits to produce scrumptious and wholesome beverages. So check us out at mymajesties.com. That's MyMajesties.com. My Majesties, an Urban Passport member.
The Cuvée Group is a Florida-based marketing and training consulting firm. We help businesses communicate to their target audience and engage them in conversation. We also help to expand their audiences, which will ultimately result in growth for those organizations. In addition to being a certified constant contact specialist, my colleagues and I are also certified in John Maxwell Leadership Principles. We use these proven principles to conduct workshops, training, and private coaching sessions for individuals and companies looking to take things to the next level. Contact us to schedule a free consultation. Issues today, don't delay, call Cuvée.
It's like a loop machine. Going around town, people trying to get down. It's like a loop machine.
The real reason why I went after Comcast and Charter, it didn't have anything to do with my cable networks. It didn't. What happened was a gentleman wanted to do the Black College Sports Network in partnership with the HBCUs, and Comcast did not accept it, and that would have made a lot of money for these black colleges. Absolutely. And it would have educated the Black College Sports Network. This is what he wanted to do. That would have educated a lot of black kids. And when they didn't do that, that's when I came off the bench and said, okay, I'm gonna light you up like a Christmas tree. Okay? That was the real reason why I got into it, was when I saw what happened with the Black College Sports Network, which I don't know. I just knew that these black, all right? I knew that these black colleges were gonna benefit, and these black kids were going to get the education that they deserved and not have to pay.
Welcome back to the BCSN Sports Wrap. Brian here and AD Drew, just following our conversation with Dr. Kenyatta Conville inside the HBCU Sports Lab. We want to remind you, just another plug for Dr. Conville. That's DrKenyattaCavil. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm sure we'll have the video splash there for Dr. Cavill's show. Of course, you can always catch them streams live on Facebook. So if you're not in the Houston area where they're on the radio or listening to the network that they're on via iHeart or some means of that, you can always catch the show on Facebook Live. So. All right, so Drew, getting back into the discussion, and I took some time in going through the records, and it's interesting that we'll start in the under D1 level. That Doc Cavil kind of brought up Bowie State and Langston. I did not get a chance to go through their season win totals of the year, and so. Let's start with the seasons. We talked about the top seasons, and I think we both agreed Winston-Salem State 2012 was the top season at 14-1. Now, I know originally we did not include multiple Winston-Salem State seasons. Now, after talking to Doc, after any thought about moving the 11 team, who I believe the 2011 team, the 2011 team was 13-1. So that team was unbeaten as well going into that final game, and they lost in the playoff, the semifinal game.
Correct.
Is there room to include that team? Is it inconceivable of us to even say that the top two seasons might have been those two Winston-Salem State teams?
You could make an argument for Winston-Salem's 11 team. I know what we actually discussed this, Brian, but we decided we wanted to go with the best of the teams from these particular programs, because you have to make that same argument for Bowie 18 and Bowie 19 team also. You have to consider both of them. And
I told you, as we talked about that, I thought that this year 19 deserved a little more credit than last. I mean, they were 9-3 last year. Now I'm trying to recall who those losses were from Bowie State in 2018. But just while you look that up, Brian, there's also, you have to throw that Langston 17 team in. That was the first one of the three in a row for Langston, and was an undefeated team. Unfortunately, like this year's Bowie team, they lost in the first round of the playoffs also,
but you have to really throw that one up for consideration at their dominance in their in the old conference that they were in before they went to Sooner Athletic Conference, and the name escapes me, but Dr. Cavill did call that during his segment. He did call the prior conference that Langston was in. And with Langston, they had their dominance over two conferences. They switched conferences after the 17 season, Brian. So that Langston's 17 team does deserve to get some consideration, at least as an honorable mention, beyond the 5 teams that we have listed, Brian.
Well, I just pulled up the 2017 schedule. So that team started now. They did not play any Division II. Well, I don't know if that's quite accurate because I see Lincoln University on here, and that may be the Division
Which
II
Lincoln?
team. Yeah, that's
Lincoln,
a great
Missouri.
question. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know which Lincoln that was. Lincoln. Lincoln, Missouri. Yeah.
That's the Division II.
Yeah, Lincoln, Missouri. So,
Okay.
yeah, they beat that team to start. And then, let's see, Lyon College, Bacon College, Texas Wesleyan, Lane College. So there's Lane. So that's
another Division II
SIC.
team.
Texas College, Arizona Christian. Those were all conference games. So pretty much everything else was conference except the Lincoln game and Lane. All those were conference games that they won. And then they lost to Northwestern College. And, this is interesting because I think this sort of falls into that how you remember a team based on how they finished. Langston 2017 lost to 10th ranked Northwestern College by a score of 55-7 in the first round of the NAIA playoffs. Now Langston was ranked number 7, so it was a bit of an upset and by a huge margin, too. I mean, so it's like it sort of feels. I don't know if you had to think about how undefeated teams finished. It sort of falls in the same breath as Bowie 2019. Virginia State 2017. I mean, teams that just lost in the first round.
Bethune 2010.
Bethune 2010. Well, they already had a loss by the time they went into the playoffs in 2010.
Okay. Yes.
But so I mean that has to be up for consideration.
And looking at the Bowie schedule from 2018, Brian, they lost to a FCS Wagner in their opening game. Then they had a hiccup against Chowan in midseason. Then, of course, they lost their last game against the ultimate national champion in Valdosta State.
Right. So that's tough. That's a tough call there. Bowie 19 or Bowie 18. I think we're gonna have to really. I mean, we may have to go against our thought there because I just go to the fact that if your team, let's just compare teams, not programs, but teams and seasons. I mean, 2011 Winston-Salem is as good as any team that year. I mean, Tuskegee 15 might be the only other team in the decade that can compare to Winston-Salem's 2011 team.
Winston 11 made it one round further than Tuskegee 15.
Right. So I mean, it sucks to leave somebody out, but I mean that's just the nature of the. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, look, if we just wanted to make it a top 10, I mean, we could go on and find 2 more teams, and just round it out to say, hey, let's just put another team. I mean, obviously Virginia State had 2 quality teams. So, I mean, we could find room for Virginia State 2014 team. I mean, that team. Now, think about this now, AD. We highlight Virginia State 2017, but Virginia State 2014 is a team that went 10-3, meaning they played 2 more games into the playoffs. I don't have, I got to go look and see. I think I put a link. Did I put a link there with Virginia State? I did put a link for Virginia State. If you take a look at what Virginia State did in 2014, it's very comparable to what they did in 17, but they went deeper in 14.
Very, very comparable. And then you also have Tuskegee 16 team that you can throw into the mix also there, Brian.
Yeah, I'll go down the list, because when I went through every program, Winston-Salem obviously had 3 seasons in which they won 10 games or more. 2011, they went 13-1. 2012, 14-1. 2013, 10-2. And then 2014, 9-2. So you have obviously the 3 seasons there. And then I think there was even some talk, the 2016 Winston-Salem State team went 9-3. That team did win some consideration for a Black College National Champion. So there were 4 Winston-Salem State teams that, were Black College National Champions, in the mix there. Moving forward to Tuskegee, you had the 15 team, which was 10-3. Well, let me go back even earlier in the decade, because you had 2012. 2012, Tuskegee went 10-2. Then in 2014, they went 9-3. 2015, 10-3. 2016, 9-3. And then 2017, 9-2. But those major years, what did you say? You said
15 and 16.
15 and 16 so you had those 3 seasons. The interesting team that I made brief mention of this with Dr. Cavill, the only program, and this even goes into FCS, so I'll include the FCS teams that I look back on, all of the programs through the course of the decade. Everybody had a blemish where they finished under 500, except Albany State. Albany State, every year, with a winning record. Yeah, the closest that they came to a non-winning record was 2016, when they finished 5-4. They only played 9 games that year. But for the last 5 seasons, actually for 8 of the seasons in the decade, Albany State lost 4 games. Obviously, their best record was 2010, where they finished 11-1. And then they had a season where they finished 7-3. But, talk about consistency with an overall record of 69-36. Yeah. That's Albany State's 10-year run.
Right, and I know, I'm a bit of a homer when I say this. I know Tuskegee had the last 2 seasons were 500 seasons, so Tuskegee did not have a losing season in the decade, but Albany State had a winning season every year of the decade.
No, let me correct you there. 2011, Tuskegee finished 4-6. That was their only year. Yeah, and they just like, and I'll tell you, Winston-Salem State this past season, when they finished 4-6, that was the only year that they finished below 500. And Tuskegee, the only year they finished below 500 was in 2011, when they finished 4-6. Winston-Salem with 84 wins, 30 losses in the decade. Tuskegee, 78 wins, 34 losses in the decade. Those were the top 2 win-losses. But technically number 3 and was Virginia State. 73 wins over the decade, 31 losses. That puts them at the 3rd most wins, 2nd fewest losses. And it's bookmarked by the 2013 season. Well, let me backtrack. It's bookend by a couple of 8-2 seasons, 2010 and 2019, 8-2. Then in the middle, 2013 they finished 9-1. 2014, a championship year, 10-3. 2016 they finished 9-2. 2017, 10-1, another Black College championship. So they had these interesting bookend years, and then they had 2 seasons where they finished a game below 500. So it's it's real weird how Virginia State over the decade, it doesn't roll off the tongue or over the thought process that this is one of the top teams of the decade. But, when we talk about teams of the decade in Division II, I think we have to give some serious consideration to moving Virginia State up from where we had them.
And it's interesting, Brian, as we're having this debate, that we can actually make a longer argument and more of a debate on the Division II level than we can on the FCS level, Brian. Because the FCS is pretty much cut and dry. A&T had the best season in 17, hands down. Grambling in 16 was probably the second best season. And then after that, it's a little bit of a crapshoot after that, but it's pretty much cut and dry 1, 2, and possibly that number 3 with Bethune in 10. Programs of the decade on the FCS level. It's pretty cut and dry. It's A&T with Bethune being a close second because of their early dominance in the decade. 3, 4, and 5 you can leave up for debate, but you have more of an argument at the Division II level and the under D1s when you throw Langston in there than you do at the Division I/FCS level.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, obviously I think hands down the 2 best seasons in Black college football are, without a doubt, North Carolina A&T's 2017. That team went 12-0. And what makes that hard, I don't know if you go and look at Grambling 2016, that one loss. I'm not sure who that one loss was to in 2016, but I have a feeling it was to an FCS team. The fact that A&T beat the FCS team that was the check game in 2017 that was on their schedule, and just for people who don't know, that was not Sam Washington's bring me my money game. That was not that where that infamous or that famous catchphrase, which is a meme, by the way. That thing has become a life of its own now. But that was in 2018 when Coach Washington said that after, I believe that was the Jacksonville State game. Or no, was that East Carolina? That was ECU, I think it was. East Carolina, where he said, "Bring me my money." But yeah, the 2017 A&T game season is probably, I mean, let's just be real. Winston-Salem going 14-0 and playing in the national championship. I mean, we're literally talking a 1A and 1B of the decade. And if you want to be that person that says, "Oh, well, I'm looking at the record and they went unbeaten," okay. But you go back and look at Winston-Salem from 2012 making it all the way to the champions. They went through the actual playoffs. Now, if you go and look at, let's just hypothetically say North Carolina A&T is 11-0 going to the FCS playoffs. Do we think North Carolina A&T in 2017 makes it to the championship game against probably North Dakota State, because they're in the championship like every year? I don't know. I don't even know who was in the final that year, but it was probably either them, James Madison, or somebody else who's always in the FCS finals. Do we think A&T makes it to the championship game?
That particular team, Brian, honestly, probably yes. The other two A&T teams, no. But that particular team was special, Brian. That particular team was very special. And just for record, Grambling, the national championship year, 11-1, the one was to Arizona, the University of Arizona, and they were defeated 31-21.
Okay. That 10-point game, that's respectable.
Yes.
That's definitely respectable. So the total numbers again, let me finish up with Albany State, 69 wins, 36 losses. Miles College, the years in which they won, let's see, their best year obviously was this past year where they finished 9-2. 9-3, I guess it would be, wouldn't it?
Yes, with the loss in the playoffs.
Yeah, so I got to update that to change that around, then add a loss to that. 9-3 was their best season in terms of wins. 2012 would be an 8-2 season, would be their best season as it relates to fewest losses. Miles with 62 wins, 45 losses. And again, I didn't do Langston, I didn't do Bowie State. So I think before we publish this article, I'm going to have to go back and look at Bowie State's record over the decade under Damon Wilson. And then I even have to go back and look at Langston because I think, Dr. Cavill did bring up a good point that we should kind of, before we, publish this and if we're only doing, and that's the hard part, we're making the conscious decision to only do 5. I mean, we could do a top 10, but I think we really need to kind of think about how we're going to do 5 and just do the 5 best teams. And regardless of, one school having multiple teams, I think if it fits, we got to make it count. We got to put it in there.
Right. Quick question for you, Brian.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you 3 teams.
Okay.
Give me 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Winston-Salem, 2012. Grambling, 2016. A&T, 2017. Those are your 3.
Wow. Let me see how quickly I can pull up the stats on the 20. Which Winston-Salem team are you giving me?
2012.
All right. So the final stats on that team, just for comparison purposes, this is a team that averaged 40.2 points per game, defensively allowed 17.4. Rushing the ball, 178 yards rushing per game, allowed 97 yards rushing per game. Passing nearly 300 yards at 293.8 per game, allowing 198.3. I mean, that's a pretty balanced team right there. I mean, what's the math on that? I mean, 178 plus 293, that's almost 500 yards average per game almost. That's pretty doggone impressive. Average 6.6 yards per play during the course of the season. Oof, AD, it's a tough one you're giving me there.
Yeah. And the only draw on that schedule, if you could call it a draw, they played a strictly Division II schedule that particular year, Brian, as I look at their schedule. UNC Pembroke, Concord College, Morehouse, Virginia Union, Bowie State, the rest of the CIAA games that they played that particular year. And
who did they lose to in the national championship game?
Until they made it to the playoffs, they scored over 28 points per game. The lowest amount of points that they scored in the regular season was 28 points on that particular team. In the playoffs, they defeated Shippensburg 37-14. They had a first-round bye. In the quarterfinals, they defeated Indiana of Pennsylvania 21-17. In the semifinals, they defeated West Texas A&M 41-18, and then they lost to Valdosta in the championship game in Florence, Alabama, 35-7.
Yeah, 35-7. Tough loss too.
Looks like Valdosta owns the CIAA when they faced them in the playoffs.
Yeah. Valdosta is just that team. I think I would have to go. You're asking me, so I'm just going to go with A&T 1 for the simple fact that they did beat an FCS, and it's so hard. It's so hard to beat an F. Am I saying it right? No, an FBS.
FBS, yes.
They beat an FBS team. Now, that team, I believe, was Charlotte in that 2017 season for North Carolina A&T. And Charlotte is not Charlotte is not even a Power 5. They're not even a Power 6 team. I believe they're out of Conference USA. But it's still hard. You always bring up scholarship numbers. It's still hard for an FCS school to beat an FBS team. That's why they give them a check to come play. And then for them
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and then for A&T to do what they did in who were the other FCS teams that A&T played in 2017?
Let's see. Let's go to A&T 2017. I've actually got Grambling's 2016 team pulled up right now, Brian.
I'm gonna move them to 3, regardless of what you say. I'm gonna put them at 3.
We're going back to 2017. Garner Webb, Mars Hills, Charlotte. Then they went through their BX schedule after that, and then
wait a minute.
Grambling in the Celebration Bowl.
Isn't Gardner Webb, and who was the other team?
Mars Hill.
Hill. Aren't those D2 FCS? Somebody's an FCS, somebody's a D2, I think.
I believe Mars Hill would be your D2.
Yeah. Huh. I'm still gonna go A&T. And if I'm not mistaken, their end of the season game against North Carolina Central was not easy because North Carolina Central was still a good team 1 year removed from sharing the MEAC.
And that was a 10-9 ball game.
Yeah, so that was a tough ball game. That was not an easy win. That was a good Central team. Granville Eastman, I believe, was still the head coach. So, yeah, okay, so I'll hear it is. Final answer.
Wait, before you get that, they began you Grambling in 16. They lost to Arizona, defeated Alcorn, defeated Jackson State, defeated Alcorn, defeated –
Who was their non-SWAC team? Or did they play a full SWAC schedule?
They played a full SWAC schedule, it looks like, this particular year. They played everybody in the SWAC once again. And then they defeated that would be everything. It would be everybody that particular year.
So,
everybody was in the SWAC and then Central.
Okay, so final answer, I'll go North Carolina A&T 1, Winston-Salem 2, and Grambling 3.
All right, let's stop beating this dead horse, Brian.
Let's finish putting some perspective on the teams from the decade. Some of the total numbers from the decade. North Carolina A&T finished the decade 79-36, just one game better than Bethune-Cookman, 78-35. The next highest win total. And this is obviously we just talked about Grambling and Alcorn State. Both of those teams finished with 69 wins. although the NCAA actually took away 9 wins from Alcorn State for violations in 2013. So if you took away 9 wins from Alcorn State, post, that season, they actually finished the decade 60-59. Although, they won on the field. You can do all the other stuff later. But even Dr. Gaville kind of talked about moving Grambling ahead of Alcorn just on the simple fact that Grambling won a Black College National Championship, or won the Celebration Bowl. Alcorn did win a Black College National Championship in
14.
But looking at that schedule of Alcorn 2015, they played our favorite team that we love to hate on, Virginia Lynchburg, who is not an NCAA or NAIA team. So if I don't count that, then technically Alcorn finished 9-3 in 2014. So the only other teams that finished in the 60s and wins, we had South. It's funny. Initially, we were looking for that 5th best team, and I came across South Carolina State's decade under Coach Buddy Pugh, in which they went 66-46 over this period of time. They started the decade with a 9-2 win season. Then in 2013, they went 9-4. 2014, they went 8-4. And of course, this year they went 8-3. So that was, the 66 wins and 46 losses. 46 losses, the third fewest of the decade behind A&T and Bethune among D1 FCS teams. I think that deserves some credit. Just took a look. Southern finished the decade 64 wins, 52 losses. Tennessee State, which won a pair of Black College National Championships in the middle of the decade, they went 56-56. And then Hampton, I just took a look, just trying to find another team. Came across Hampton with a 52-59 record, so obviously didn't really, consider them. But I went through. So, that was sort of the recap. Again, the most interesting thing I found was what we found that we talked about in Division II, that Albany State, among all of these schools that we mentioned, Albany State is the only team to go with a plus 500 record in every season. Everybody else had a blip. It's interesting when you look at this and you see how 7 wins has sort of become the norm for Bethune-Cookman after the first 5 or 6 seasons where they only had 2 or 3 losses. A&T, a horrible start to the decade, and look how it's finished. Yeah. Same can be said for Alcorn State. A horrible start. Grambling had after a couple of years on the end of the Doug Williams era, they had 2 1-10 seasons before Broderick Fobbs took over.
Including the famous walkout of the football players complaining about football facilities during that time.
That's a good point. I think Rod Reed of Tennessee State, who's been there this entire period, Tennessee State has sort of, hung around, 3 wins, 4 wins, 6, 7, 4, 6. That's the last 5, 6 seasons for Tennessee State. South Carolina State, of course, we mentioned. They've had a couple of 5 and 6 seasons. That's what's interesting about the season Coach Pugh had this year. The 3 previous seasons were all losing seasons, 5 and 6, 3 and 7, 5 and 6. And so you can kind of see why there was a lot of talk about Buddy Pugh stepping away after 3 losing seasons. And now it looks like things may be on the uprise. Southern started with a 2-win season in 2010, a pair of 4-win seasons. And I think that was all before Dawson Odoms took over. So you can, it's kind of interesting when you look back at the decade. So
one other thing about Albany State. Albany State has done what they've done, and that consistency with two different head coaches.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was that was the other thing we kind of talked about in terms of coaches. Albany State had two coaches over the decade. Winston-Salem State has had two coaches over the decade. How about Virginia State winning a championship with two different coaches? Alcorn State, two different coaches. A&T, two different coaches. I think everybody else, Bethune-Cookman, two different coaches, but Brian Jenkins was the coach in the early half of the decade where they had their most success. But everybody else has pretty much seen their success with one coach over this time period. So that'll do that. Are we in consensus here? Well, where are we at with our here's what we'll do. The article will be coming out in the next week where we post our top team. So you'll have to stay tuned and listen to that or read that. But in the interim, as you listen to this podcast, we want to hear from you, want to hear your thoughts. And if you have some thoughts or opinions on the season of the decade or the teams of the decade, the program of the decade, let us know. Hit us up on Twitter at MyBCSN1, the number 1, or find us individually on Twitter at DRB365 is where you can find me. And Drew, you can find him at BCSN Drew. When we come back after this break, AD and I will begin to talk about the top performers in individual plays of the year. And that'll be how we conclude this end of the season podcast. You're watching and listening to the BCSN Sports Wrap with me, Brian, and him, AD. I almost made another AD Drew thing as I did the other day. So, all right, we'll be back right after these words.
The Black College Sports Network is proud to partner with ComputerRatings.com. That's COMPUGHTER ratings.com for the upcoming college football season. ComputerRatings.com delivers rankings, game predictions, and statistics for hundreds of professional and collegiate teams. The key feature of ComputerRatings.com is the Versus Sports Simulator, which allows users to simulate any possible matchup and view the predicted scores along with a side-by-side stats analysis. Improve your odds by signing up for a subscription. Monthly, semi-yearly, and yearly subscriptions are available. For our listeners and viewers, use the promo code BCSN19 and get 15% off of your subscription at checkout. Visit www.computerratings.com. That's COMPUGHTER ratings.com.
Q Time is a classic Atlanta soul food restaurant located in the historic West End. Q Time Soul Food is a family business started by Fred and Christine Crenshaw. Come on in, relax, and sink your chops into our tantalizing, mouth-watering, distinctive soul food with a twist, the Q Time way. 1120 Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard, or call your order in at 404-758-2881. Do you miss your mama's cooking? Then come on down to Q Time, an Urban Passport member.
Now, you can live in Texas and not have a good red meat blend. Texas Cowboy Dust is designed for steak and other red meats. It's out to be my most popular spice blend, made with onions, peppers, ground mushrooms, pink salt, and other spices. Texas Cowboy Dust also goes great with chicken, pork, vegetables, and adds a restaurant-quality sheen to gravies and sauces.
Let's face it, shopping for insurance can be time-consuming. That's why when it comes to your auto, home, and life insurance needs, make things simple and trust the experts at Allstate. They will help you get the coverage that fits your needs while helping you bundle your life, home, and auto policies. Bundling saves you money, sure, but it also saves you time. so you can enjoy the things that matter most even more. Contact me, Tammy Haynes, your local agent, for a free personalized insurance quote. Allstate, are you in good hands?
It's like a loop machine. All around town, people trying to get down. It's like a loop machine.
Welcome back to the BCSN Sports Wrap. Brian Fulford, AD Drew here, and this is our last go around as we kind of look back on the end of the season in Black college football. Anything that you feel like we've missed, AD. I went back and as we talked about some of the top players and things of that nature, anything in the statistics that you looked at and said, you know what, I feel like I missed something. We feel like we missed somebody.
No, the only thing that we have regarding this will come out in an article. We've been taking a look at the attendance for various events throughout the year, Brian.
Yeah, what does that come
on
up
campus?
with?
On-campus attendance versus classic attendance versus homecoming attendance. We have a great product here in HBCU football. This is strictly my opinion. The opinions I'm about to express in no way, shape, or form reflect the opinions of the SportsWrap show and the Jericho Broadcasting Network and the Black College Sports Network. But we do not take advantage of our market worth, of our economic power in HBCU sports, especially in HBCU football, because when you could draw 30, 40, 50,000 people to a classic, Brian, we're not getting our fair economic windfall out of those events. When you can draw 20,000 to your homecoming, we're not getting the academic windfalls for our schools out of that homecoming, like we should. And the people who advertise and wish to advertise with HBCU sports, they're missing an entire market here, Brian. Where else can you get 30, 40,000 primarily African Americans, and potentially expose them to your product? Back in the day, it would be luster or some type of hair care product, But there are so many people who they use us, but they don't put the marketing dollars back into our programs, which leads to the poor facilities that we have at a lot of our schools, because we're not hitting these advertisers and these people with the pockets where we should. We have the market base. We have the eyes, the ears. We spend money on what we want to spend money on, and we want to spend money on entertainment, because that's what football is. That's what college football is. It's entertainment, but the experience that you get with our entertainment, we're not capitalizing on it.
Wow. And do you feel like that is something that falls on the shoulders of schools, or should schools be looking to get help from outside groups? Because I feel like we have gotten to a point where I think initially we thought schools, and we feel like, why isn't our school doing this? Why, so on and so forth. But really, I don't think our schools have the knowledge base, the time to handle things of that nature.
And that's exactly where I was going with the transition that we're going through. Look, when we were in school, and prior to us being in school, it was newspaper articles and cable TV. If you had success on those, if you can get your school with decent newspaper articles in a couple of national magazines and on cable TV, on the local cable TV channel, you were doing good. And if you were able to get on the local network TV, you were doing excellent. And that's what the administrators from 20, 30, and 40 years ago, that's all they were focused on. But in today's time, 60-70% of African Americans get their information off of the internet. They stream, they binge watch, that's what they do. So if you're going to advertise using media, traditional media is out of the window. But our HBCUs seem like they still focus on traditional media. That being such as the deals with the ESPN, the deals with other networks. People want to be able to stream. They want to be able to watch it on their phones. They want to be able to do things like that. It seems like the people at the universities haven't quite caught up with the times, because most of the decision makers at these universities are 50 and 60 and even 70 years old, but the market and the people who are spending the money are 25 to 40, Brian. That's where it is. And then number two, the experience, the tailgating, the band, the experience. Being at an HBCU football game is like no other event that you can go to. Where else can you get 40,000 black folk doing something positive in one accord? I don't care which team you're cheering on. It's still 40,000 black folk, African American, doing something positive. They're on a Saturday afternoon, cooking, tailgating, having fun, even drinking their beer. But they're not drinking their beer belligerently. They're out having good, clean family fun. So we're not taking advantage of those two opportunities to market. It seems like the university, all they want to do is sell a tailgating spot to you. Sell me an experience. Sell me a package.
Yeah,
when we go, one last thing. When we go to our stadiums, and as well as I do, you have got to have Wi-Fi to be able to handle all those people at the stadiums. Where there's not enough bandwidth at our stadiums to handle the uploading, and that's what you got to be able to do. It's not the downloading, it's the uploading. Our stadiums tend to not have enough bandwidth to deal with the 20,000 people that are in our own campus stadiums. So that's, I know I've probably gone off on a tangent, Brian, but I had to get that out.
Well, what you've given is a blueprint for someone to do some market research with many of these schools and really get some honest evaluation of what they have, what they do, because because a lot of things you're talking about, I don't think schools are equipped to do that. And if you, as I said, you have to be able to be willing to bring in, either if you're not going to hire someone to do this, which is a large undertaking, then you've got to be able to go out and find maybe an outside company to come in and help you. I mean, there are plenty of companies, plenty of schools that utilize the services of outside groups. Now, every school, I mean, obviously, at larger levels, you have schools that are creating their hiring and they're creating their own department. But I still even think there's opportunities to bring in some outside consultants, bring out outside marketing, digital marketing firms that can help with what it is you're talking about, AD. The question is someone going to pay for that? Is someone going to be ambitious enough to see the long-range benefit of doing that?
I'm going to disagree with you on one accord, Brian.
Okay.
We do have it in internal at our HBCUs. Every HBCU that's out here playing football has a business school. Within that business school is a marketing program. This could be that real-world experience that those students can use to elevate them into those executive positions, ultimately in marketing companies upon graduations. Why not start with the consumer that's right there on your campus, Brian?
Well, see, now you're talking about
why not train them to do this? Why not use?
Well, you have to be able to go out and get. You have to create that partnership. You have to be willing to go over to that business school, that marketing professor or professors, and get them to buy into one more thing that they have to do in creating this program or this whatever you want to call it, this partnership with the athletic department.
Isn't that the mission of our schools, to create opportunities for our students to learn and to educate themselves and put them out in a better position? Why not start with this at home? Same reason that these schools outsource a lot of their streaming. Why? If you have a mass communications or journalism department at your school, why not start there with those students in your journalism or communications department and then outsource it there? Yeah, you may need to bring in one or two professors with an expertise in those particular areas, but it may not necessarily
or use those professors as consultants.
Firm. Yes.
Yeah.
But it does not require a whole marketing firm. You have, quote unquote, cheap labor, just like the football.
Well, stop. Let's not call it cheap labor now. Let's not, because see, when you say cheap labor, you make it sound like it's not a resource that's of value.
It is, but that student who's doing that research, that marketing research, is not going to be able to command the same salary as somebody with 10 years of marketing experience, but can give you just as valuable of information. And
true. I just don't want to call it cheap because I don't want it to be connected with the phrase cheap.
Right. But I have been that student who's done that research and did all of that research that was published in some other PhD's paper, and deep down in the credits, you saw my name on the research.
Right.
So, yeah, but
that's how things used to be done. I don't know if that is
with my name in a publication.
Yes, you do, and look, that's how things. I don't know if things still roll that way. You know what I'm saying? I mean, just the concept of finding interns to do things. I mean, interns expect to get paid now, whereas when we were in college,
I did not say free.
But you called it cheap, though. You called it cheap. Cheap has a nasty connotation to it, though.
But that could be a work study student.
I'm just saying, you called it cheap.
That could be part of your assistantship.
Okay.
On campus as part of your scholarship. Yes, it does need to be part of some type of class for a grade, but once again, that we'll say $12, $14, $15 an hour that you may pay that college student, it pales in comparison to that $125,000 that you need to pay an outside consultant to come in and do it.
All right. Anything else, AD? As you passionately took us down a road we had not planned, but it's all good. It's a good thought, especially here at the end of the season.
Performances of the year, Brian. Let's get into it.
Performances of the year. I was going to. Well, plays of the year. One of the things that I wanted to to get, we started, I think, we started somewhere talking about players and players. And what I wanted to do is make sure we hit all the major categories as best as possible, and talking about some of the top position players of the year. I mean, obviously we did just to recap, we did our top offensive players of the year were Chris Rowland, Akil Glass, Deshaun Wethington, Felix Harper, Ryan Stanley. So we had a receiver, 3 quarterbacks, and a running back. But we left a lot of positive names out. So when we go and look at, and I just put this list together, so this is just me. I'm not putting you on this. But when I look at the top 5 running backs in Black college football, I start with Deshaun Wethington, of course, who was in our top 5. And then for me, number 2, I go to Jermaine Martin, whose 23 touchdowns were, I believe, the most in Black college football. He had 1,446 yards in 12 games, averaged 120.5. He was top 10 in yards per game in the FCS. He was number 4. My number 3 running back was Jordan Bentley of Alabama A&M, 272 attempts. Now, in comparison, Jermaine Martin, only 186 attempts. Jordan Bell was a workhorse this year, 272 attempts, 1,417 yards rushing, 18 touchdowns. He even had 21 receptions for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was number 5 in yards per game rushing in the FCS. My number 4 running back, Tim Whitfield. In 10 games, Whitfield rushed for 1,317 yards on 192 attempts. He scored 20 touchdowns, averaged 130.1 yards per game, which next to Deshaun Wethington was the second best in Black college football. And then Hosea Franklin of Lincoln, Missouri. In 11 games, he had 1,417 rushing yards, only 5 touchdowns, but he was the brightest spot in a poor season for Lincoln, Missouri. My top 5 quarterbacks in Black college football, of course, we have Akil Glass, Felix Harper of Alcorn State, Ryan Stanley of FAMU, and then I go to Jerome Johnson of Bowie State and Austin Hensley of West Virginia State, rounding out my top 5 quarterbacks. My top 5 wide receivers, Chris Rowland, of course, was our number 1 overall player. But then I go to Xavier Smith of FAMU, 77 catches, 1,159 yardage, and 11 touchdowns. Number 3, DeJuan Green of Elizabeth City State. You don't really hear much about ECSU, but he was a bright spot for them. He had 66 catches, over 1,000 yards, averaged 91.45 yards per game, had 16 touchdowns on the year, which was the most among receivers in Black college football. Number 4, Jadakiss Bonds of Hampton, had 15 touchdowns receiving, 70 catches, 943 yards. And then number 5, Abdul Fattah Ibrahim, Alabama A&M. A&M had 2 guys who caught over 1,000 yards for the year, but I went with Ibrahim over the other receiver, who I think is Brian Jenkins. I think was the other receiver. I could be wrong there. But Ibrahim had 11 touchdowns on 59 catches, 1,004 yards. And I think some of the other names, when it came to defensive players, I know that we talked about we talked about Demetrius Lofton, the sophomore defensive lineman from Morehouse, who finished with 21 tackles for loss, which was 2.1 tackles for loss per game, and 11.5 sacks. Keontae Hampton, the sophomore linebacker from Jackson State, was the SWAC Defensive Player of the Year. He had 106 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. You also had Armani Holloway the junior linebacker from Alabama A&M, had 114 tackles, 62 solo, 14.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. And how about Tracy Tompkins, the senior defensive back from Mississippi Valley State, 107 tackles on 68 solo, 12.5 tackles for loss, 37 yards on those tackles, a sack, 3 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and an INT. And I think if I had to throw in a 5th guy into that mix, I had the name pulled right up. So
did you say Joshua Pryor?
Yeah, I was going with the guys outside of them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I was just I would say you've got guys in terms of total tackles. You probably have to go to somebody like Ian McBurrow, linebacker senior from Morgan State, who had 111 tackles. Or you could go to somebody like a Rico Kennedy, another senior linebacker with 105 tackles, or Nigel Chavis, another senior linebacker who finished with 107 tackles. So 107 tackles. So, I mean, those are just some of the other names that I just felt bad that we, I didn't want to leave those guys out. So I wanted to put those guys on wax, so to speak. All right. Top. What are we going, performances or plays?
Let's go plays first.
Plays of the year. All right.
And I can quickly go down my list if you want me to start it off, Brian.
Well, let's go to some of our guests, because I did put it out there to some of our friends out on the our friends of the podcast, as we'll call them. And one of the guys, Mo Carter, who covers. He's a sports director. I hope I don't get this wrong because I'm off the cuff here. I think it's WTXL in Huntsville, Alabama. He's a sports director there. Southern grad, but they cover Alabama A&M, especially right there in the backyard. And Mo's picks for his top plays of the year, he puts down Alabama A&M's blocked extra point and 90-yard return by Mike Mills, writing that is very rare to see the return on a 2-point try.
Although we did see one in the Celebration Bowl.
We did. Isn't that funny? We did see one in the Celebration Bowl. So obviously he wrote this before the Celebration Bowl. So in all honesty, transparency, this was submitted before the Celebration Bowl. He also had Akil Glass' game-winning touchdown to Brian Jenkins at the Black College Hall of Fame Classic. I think I had that on my list as well.
And that was on my list. And that was
on yours as well.
Yes.
Grambling's block of an Alcorn State field goal in overtime. That 19-16 win by Grambling kept them in the SWAC West race, and it also kind of made the SWAC East a little interesting there for a couple of weeks. I know I had that on my list. And then he ends it with, of course, we're talking about blocked field goals. Southern's blocked field goal, game-winning field goal attempt to win the Bayou Classic. And so that was the play that pretty much decided the Classic, sent Southern to the SWAC championship game. I think it would have been really interesting to see what would happen with Grambling versus Alcorn, because that is the team who has given Alcorn State fits. The same way that Alcorn has beaten Southern, it's Grambling that has beaten Alcorn and given them trouble over the last several years. So it would have been interesting to see how that went. What are some other games on your list, AD?
I got week 3, UAPB and Tennessee State. Last play of the game, Shannon Patrick, 17-yard touchdown pass to Jeremy Brown to win that game 37-31 over Tennessee State. Also, the Alcorn Prairie View A&M game, when Alcorn threw the ball 65 yards with 14 plays, but the big play was when Tim McNair scored on a 3-yard touchdown pass with just 40 seconds to go in that game that went back and forth there, Brian. Another big play that I had, Bowie State's block, and ironically, all of these were in the same week that I'm talking about here, Brian. Bowie State's block punt against Shaw on the block punts in the final 2 possessions to come out with that thrilling victory against Shaw, 26-21, en route to the undefeated regular season. And
now, did you include? Let me ask: Did you include just one block or both blocks?
Well, the final block was the one that I'm specifically talking about.
Okay.
Because that was the one that completed the comeback.
Yeah.
And the final 2 plays that I have involve Florida A&M University. The first one, which was actually occurred a little bit later, was the FAMU South Carolina State game when this is a sequence of plays that all occurred together. There was the block punt by South Carolina State that was recovered in the end zone to give South Carolina the lead late in the ball game. But, of course, there was a celebration penalty when it seemed like the entire South Carolina State team came off the bench and ran onto the field to celebrate South Carolina State taking the lead, which in turn led to a 15-yard celebration penalty, followed by the kickoff out of bounds, which gave FAMU the ball at the 50-yard line, actually at the 45-yard line, to start their final drive, in which they went on to defeat South Carolina State. But that sequence from the block punt celebration penalty and the kickoff was kind of just I got that grouped as like one moment in time.
Okay.
And then the last one that I had, the big plays with their backup quarterback, Rashawn McKay, when he hit Marcus Williams in the back of the end zone on a 22-yard third down touchdown pass in overtime to defeat North Carolina A&T for the second consecutive year in a row for Florida A&M University. Those are the plays that I have right there, Brian.
All right. Well, you have.
Oh wait, well, I am missing one last play. This is the last one I need to put on.
See if you're going to take another one of mine, because you so far taken all of the ones that I had, but it's all good. So what else you got?
Another play of the year was the failed water bucket play in the Virginia Union game, where Virginia Union tried to pull the water bucket play and was unsuccessful with it, and it led to Virginia State defeating Virginia Union. That was also a play or a misplay of the year.
Okay. So I will start with a misplay of the year, just sort of finishing up where you were, and I'll go to the Shawan's missed 2-point conversion in double overtime versus Shaw after mounting this huge comeback to send it to overtime. And all this is happening at home, and they go for it. And then just seeing that live, seeing how close that ball was to being caught, really might have been the play of the year had the receiver come up with it, but he missed that one. So that is sort of I chalk that up to a missed attempt there. I'll go to a couple of FAMU plays in that South Carolina State game. I'm going to go to Ryan Stanley's game-winning touchdown pass to Mr. Young to win that game for FAMU. And this comes on the heels of Stanley had a great game statistically, except for probably 2 passes that he wishes he could have back. One of them was returned for a pick 6, and the other one was the interception in the end zone that then South Carolina State turned around, switched quarterbacks to Corey Fields, and Corey Fields engineered this comeback for South Carolina State. But other than that, Stanley had a great game. And then also there's the Ryan Stanley to Xavier Smith game-winning touchdown against Southern. That was another play which kind of stood out to me, and I think that one stood out to me because of the corner post move by Xavier Smith, which was probably one of the best routes I've seen a receiver run in the Black college football season. I challenge, I say that up until maybe some of the moves that I saw a couple guys make in the Celebration Bowl. So there were a couple guys got put on some skates in the Celebration Bowl. So I'd have to say those are pretty significant. Other top plays of the year for me, how about Taylor Porter, running back for UAPB, in the fourth quarter of a tie ball game against Lane College, Lane Division II SIAC game, UAPB hosting homecoming. I think the score was at that time 38-38. UAPB backed up on their own 2-yard line, and then Taylor Porter gets the inside handoff, hits the A-gap. I believe he went up the middle and was just gone. 98-yard touchdown run to basically give UAPB the lead and eventually the win. So, I mean, that was a pretty memorable play that happened. I've also got Noel Ruiz's game-winning field goal in the season opener for North Carolina A&T against Elon. And I thought that was pretty significant and memorable for 2 reasons. One is he had missed 2 field goals already in the fourth quarter. And then this field goal attempt, I think, was maybe 50-something yards. And it was longer than the 2 that he missed. And then the young man only missed 4 all season. So he missed 2 of them right there at the start of the season. But it was a pretty cool moment for A&T. I mean, even as a college football fan, Black college football fan, I had a good time watching that game. Trust me. And I was rooting for A&T. I always root for our HBCUs when they're playing the PWIs. Move into some other outstanding, memorable moments, plays. And I want to say I get this name right. I hope I do. Manasseh Bailey of Morgan State caught a ball on the sideline that was a pretty doggone unbelievable catch against North Carolina A&T that would help preserve a win for them in that contest for Morgan State. A pretty outstanding catch for Mr. Bailey, and that was a big win. That was probably the highlight play in the win against North Carolina A&T. North Carolina Central's Codrington, Mr. Codrington, I can't think of his first name, I apologize. He had a 75-yard kickoff return following a Delaware State touchdown that tied the game at 23, and then on the ensuing kickoff with 50 seconds left, Codrington returns the kickoff 75 yards. North Carolina Central wins 30-23, I believe was the final score in that ball game. Last 2 memorable plays for me were in the Florida Classic, and one of them I didn't even see. One of them we did not see because we were on the elevator on a 2nd and 25 on their own 41, and Bethune-Cookman's Akevius Williams connects with Mr. Francois for a 44-yard play that put the ball at the FAMU 15-yard line, and on the next play, Bethune goes in for what would be the game-leading at the time and would turn out to be the game-winning touchdown score from Mr. Washington with 2:15 to play in the Florida Classic. And that was pretty much a gut punch of 2 plays and the longest elevator ride that I've ever been on, as FAMU would end up losing. And then, of course, I would go to the last pass of Ryan Stanley's career, which was intercepted by Devin James of Bethune-Cookman. Just the fact that for all of his accolades and all of the awards, Ryan Stanley's last 3 games against Bethune-Cookman, there was a major interception to either seal the win or prevent FAMU from winning. Unbelievable. I mean, the football gods are so cruel at times. I mean, I can't imagine. I can't think in modern football. My memory is not deep enough to think of the last young man who went through such adversity in 3 consecutive seasons against a rival. But that was our top plays. If you have a top play from 2019, make sure to share those with us. I know you can leave us a comment anywhere we are. Facebook, you can leave it on the website, mybcsn.net. You can send it to us via Twitter at mybcsn1, and let us know what your top play or your most memorable play, just something that stood out from the 2019 season that you can recall. All right, so now we fast forward now to the top individual performances of the year, AD. Let me do this, and I kind of categorized a couple of things. I created a couple categories here. I don't know if you saw that. Before we get into some of these individual performances, we had 2, I think these were 2 unique clubs. For quarterbacks, we had a 6-touchdown quarterback club. And what I mean, we had 6 quarterbacks who either threw or combined rushing and passing accounted for 6 touchdowns in a particular game. In week 5, Felix Harper for Alcorn State was 21 of 30, 396 yards, passed for 6 touchdowns. Also in week 5, you had Slade Jarman of Fort Valley State, who was 25 of 43, 391 yards and 6 touchdown passes. And then also in week 5, you had Jerome Johnson, 19 of 29, 307 yards, 4 touchdown passing, 1 interception, and then he rushed for 2 touchdowns. So that's where his 6 came from. Week number 7, we had 2 quarterbacks part of the 6-touchdown club. That was Austin Hensley of West Virginia State, who was 28 of 38, 414 yards, 6 touchdowns and an INT. And then you had Jawan Carter of Norfolk State, 16 of 23, 377, 4 touchdowns. He also ran 8 times for 56 yards and 2 scores. And then the last member of the club was at the Celebration Bowl, and that was Khalil Carter of A&T. Finished his career with an 18 of 30, 364 passing yard game, 6 touchdowns, and ran 96 yards rushing. The other club that we created was the 400-yard passing club, and only 4 quarterbacks made this list all season. We had DeAndre Johnson in week number 5 for Texas Southern. He was 25 of 37, 420 yards and 2 touchdowns. You had 2 quarterbacks in week 7. One of them was Austin Hensley, so we just mentioned his stats. But then you also had Ryan Stanley, and I believe this was the South Carolina State game, week 7, where he was 30 of 49, 427 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And then in week number 11, Akeel Glass, who had been flirting with 400 at least 2 other times, was finally hit the mark, where he was 25 of 40, 410 yards, and 4 touchdowns, 0 picks. All right, AD, I'll turn it over to you for a second. What were some of your top individual performances of the year?
All right, give me just a second because I just lost my place there, Brian. Top performers.
I could go to one other club here.
Wait. Go ahead. Go to that last club. So just like,
well,
I got to scroll up on my sheet there.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say we only had I didn't, we obviously had only one running back that made the 300-yard club. We had quite a few guys, too many. I didn't think to keep track of this, but the 200-yard, I don't know if it was easier to do a 200-yard club or a 250-yard club, but that's something that maybe, what's more impressive, 250 or 200?
250, definitely.
250?
Yeah.
All right. So we got, that'll be an interesting one. I can put that one together. Go ahead with your performances. Yep. Yeah.
All right. Since you focus mainly on offense, well, let's go to the 15 tackle club, Brian.
Okay. Wow.
Couple of ones that stood out to me. Trayshawn Smith, week 2 for Prairie View A&M, 15 tackles, 2 of them solos, 2.5 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks in the game versus Nicholls State. Jonathan Mathis, senior linebacker for Morehouse, 15 tackles, 3.5 for loss, a fumble recovery, and a pass breakup against Miles. And the king of the pack, Solomon Muhammad, week 3 for Alcorn, 18 tackles, 15 of them were solos, Brian, 2.5 tackles for loss, and a sack in a win over Prairie View. Sterling Muhammad for Virginia Union had 15 tackles and a forced fumble in a win over Johnson C. Smith. And I'm going down my list to see if I can find any other 15 tackle games. I think that's pretty much all of the 15 tackle games that I had on my list there, Brian.
I feel like there were a lot of guys who were a part of that 15 tackle club. As I just think back to some of the performances from the past year. So some other performers you were talking defense, so I did spotlight and I saw a few defensive ones here. So I'll share those. You did talk about the Solomon Muhammad and the 18 tackles, 15 of them solo, and a win for Prairie View. How about, and this one came courtesy of our friend of the podcast, Chris Ferguson. Defensively, he brought up Joshua Pryor of Bowie State in the CIAA championship game where he had 10 tackles, 6 of them were solo, 4.5 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. And how about Dimitri Morcell, also of Bowie State, with 2 pick sixes versus Lincoln, PA, 1 of 34 yards to start the scoring, and then 1 of 64 later in the second half. Of course, both of those young men were part of our top 5 defensive players of the year. I'll keep going here. I don't know if you have any others. How about interesting tandems? I've got a pair of tandems here that I thought had big performances in a week. Hold on, AD. I forgot a very important club. I forgot a club. How could I do this? While we have a 6-touchdown club, it just so happens we actually have a 7-touchdown club. Would you believe that?
That's a solo club. That's an exclusive club.
No, it's not. It's not so exclusive.
Wow.
I found out. Yeah, I slept on this. We recall Bryce Witt in the 7 touchdowns on 14 of 22 passing, 259 yards. He also had 78 rushing yards and a rush touchdown. That was all in week 3 against Alderson Broadus. Amik Watkins caught 7 catches, 185 yards, and 5 touchdowns. That's what started me down this road when I was talking about, quarterback receiver tandems that had big days. Well, the other person who was part of the 7-touchdown club, this one happened in week number 11. Corey Fields of South Carolina State. He was 18 of 29, 330 yards, 7 touchdown passing. His touchdowns were from 39, 5, 9, 43, 42, 14, and 6, and only 1 interception. So Corey Fields joining Bryce Witt as part of our 7-touchdown club. Pretty doggone impressive. The other combination of quarterback and receiver that had awesome days, Kedrick Patterson and DeJuan Green. For 2 weeks late in the season, week 8 and week 9, these two look like the Joe Montana and Jerry Rice of black college football. I mean, whatever quarterback receiver tandem you want to come up with, Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison, whoever else who is it in St. Louis? Kurt Warner and what? Terry Holt or Isaac Bruce?
Oh, Ike Boots, either one.
Yeah. So I mean, these two guys in week 8, Kedrick Patterson was 18 of 27, 343 yards passing and 5 touchdowns. DeJuan Green caught 10 of those passes for 184 yards and 3 scores. Then they came back and did it again in week number 9. Patterson was 23 of 34, 330 yards and 4 touchdowns with an INT. And Green caught 13 passes, 191 yards, and 2 touchdowns. By far and away, a great 2 weeks for those 2 guys. And the other combination I came up with, 2 guys who had ridiculous days, DeAndre Harris and Manasseh Bailey of Morgan State. This was back in, I think this was I didn't write this down, but it looks like it might have been week 13. Week 12 or week 13 is when this happened. Week 13. DeAndre Harris was 11 of 17, 317 yards, 5 touchdowns. Bailey caught 5 catches, 177 yards, 4 touchdowns from 87, 44, 40, and 11 yards out. That's how long the touchdown runs were for Harris. Bailey, excuse me. That was his. Harris was the quarterback. Do you want to go with any names that you have? Any top performances you want to add?
No, I think we've pretty much covered just about everybody this particular year, Brian.
Oh, no, we didn't. No, not by far. No, sir, did we? I figured you had more names. I told you I went deep dive on this, man. So I'll keep going here.
Dive in, touch the bottom.
How about didn't mention Jermaine Martin's 299 yards, 2 touchdown performances against Charleston Southern, 84 and 76 yards. That was in the 4th quarter. Dewanya Tucker, 263 and 2 touchdowns versus Grambling in the State Fair Classic was a school single game record. Sophomore running back Emmanuel Wilson of Johnson C. Smith in week number 3, 12 rushes, 265 net yards, and 3 touchdowns. Again, I said he only had 12 attempts, 265 and 3 touchdowns. Pretty impressive. Tim Whitfield in week 6 for Langston, the running back, 19 carries, 230 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Pretty impressive for him. Terraris Saffold, a name that we really didn't talk about a lot, but he had his biggest day in week number 7 for Central State. He ran the ball 13 times for 240 yards and 3 touchdowns. He ended the day with 322 all-purpose yards. I think that might have been a season high, in terms of all-purpose yards in one day. Even Deshaun Wevington, when he ran for 307, I don't think he did anything really in the passing game. So 322, I believe, was a record all-purpose yard day in black college football. A couple quarterbacks. I've got Slade Jarman in week 7. He was 33 of 48, 386 yards, 4 touchdowns, and then he had another rushing touchdown. Speaking of quarterbacks who ran the ball, how about Ladarius Skelton in week number 10 for Southern, where he ran the ball 34 times for 238 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then he passed the ball 16 of 25, 198 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's a big day, almost, 436 yards that Skelton accounted for in that day. Do I have that right? Yeah, 436. Yep, pretty impressive day for him. I know we've mentioned this before, but Jerome Johnson in week number 9 for Bowie against Virginia Union, that was a big day for him. 5 touchdown passes, 395 yards passing. I think the last one that I have here, I know we've mentioned Deshaun Wethington's 307 and 3 touchdowns in week 11. But did you know in week number 9, Wethington went for 297 rushing yards and 3 scores as well. So in a 2-week period, he ran for 600 yards and 6 touchdowns in week number 9 and 11 combined. Xavier Smith of FAMU had some pretty big days, through the course of the season, but his biggest day was probably week number 10, where he had 9 receptions for 184 yards and 4 scores of 25, 16, 59, and 8. And the last one, AD, I promise this is the last one, as I just go through the list here. The last one that I came up with on his last game as a Bulldog for Alabama A&M, Jordan Bentley, the running back, and I thought one of the most consistent running backs in black college football this year, 29 attempts, 245 yards rushing, and 4 touchdowns, 5, 22, 9, and 42. So that was a very impressive way to end for Jordan Bentley. All right, and of course, if you guys have any top performances, let us know. We've given out the Twitter and website page, but of course, my BCSN, the number 1 on Twitter and Instagram is where you can find us. You can use that to look for us on Facebook. And you can send us a note directly. You can find Drew at BCSN Drew. You can find me at DRB365, and of course the website is mybcsn.net. Let us know any individual performances that we might have missed or that you thought were pretty doggone significant from the past year. And with that, AD, I think we can close the book on the 2019 black college football season. Are you sure we read through everything? Is there anything you feel like we might have missed? I was a pretty deep dive.
I think that's it. I think it's, it's Christmas time. The perfect analogy would be the President's wrap. Can we put the bow on it?
All right. Well said. Okay, so that's going to do it for this end of the season podcast. We hope you enjoyed this look back at 2019 from us to you. And, share your comments and thoughts in the various places. And I think we can, from here on out, we kind of talk about the future. Probably, I think the only postseason award that's left is I think we'll find out who the Black College Football Hall of Fame names as their College Player of the Year. I would be shocked if it's not Chris Rowland, but I've been shocked before. Do you have who would you think is the favorite, or who would you predict to win that contest? And the 4 names again. Do you know who the 4 names are? I just want to put that out there.
Go back over the 4 names again.
Yeah. Okay. So the 4 names are Chris Rowland, Jermaine Martin, Felix Harper, and Ryan Stanley.
I'm going to be honest with you, Brian. Depends on when the vote went in. If the vote went in after the Celebration Bowl, it would not shock me if Jermaine Martin is the player of the year.
I would tend to agree. I think the lack of attention that Chris Rowland is getting is pretty amazing, given what he did and whose record he broke and how long it stood. But like you said, the press coverage of A&T and Jermaine Martin might be enough to get him the award from some voters who aren't paying attention to what Chris Rowland did this year. So, all right. Well, that's going to do it. We thank Dr. Kenyatta Cavill for joining us, and we appreciate our producer, Roy, for editing and making it possible, putting it on YouTube and all the other good stuff. So we appreciate all of the coaches that have been a part of our shows in 2019. We appreciate all of the retweets, all of the comments, good and bad. All press is good press, as long as we keep trying to do something positive for Black college football, Black college student athletes, and HBCUs. And so we hope you've enjoyed our show, and I'm looking forward to a great 2020. Our last show of the year, last show of the decade. So it's been a fun ride, and so I speak, I'm sure, for AD Drew in saying thank you, and we will see you next year and next decade. Thanks for listening to the Sports Wrap. Right. Thanks for listening to the Sports Wrap. Peace out.
I'll holler.
It's like a loop machine. All around town, people trying to get down. It's like a loop machine.
But you stay hard.